So for you and for everyone else, I am enduring the unbearable 77-degree current temperature inside my place.
The sacrifice is understood. And
I mean, that
since
should go into my participation points,
I
I
would think
believe.
so, it's like a
Yeah.
multiplier. For every degree of pain, you get an extra 10% point.
Excellent, excellent. Well, talking to you is a joy, so I guess it cancels out.
And actually, I'm all for that because, you said would you say 76 there?
Yes. Let me guess. What do you got?
It's very cool here today. It's only 98.
Good Lord.
Welcome to the GMs Corner, a Brewster Baseball Association podcast where we put general managers on the hot seat, try to steal all of their best secrets. I am Ron Collins, general manager of the Yellow Springs 9, and today it will be Stephen Shaw joining me from the Louisville Sluggers. I have been looking forward to this for like forever, so thank you for sitting down with me, Stephen.
I am not sitting down because now the seat is fucking boiling already. I assume it's acceptable to curse on these owner podcasts because otherwise I don't know if this one's going to get done.
No, I think you should quit your damn cussing is what I think that you should do.
That's just not in me.
Used to say as she called me a damn horse's ass for whatever.
Well, do as I say, not as I do. That's what the words I live by.
There
basically.
You go. Well, I think just to give a general quick intro for folks who don't know, Steve and I, Steve or Steven?
I've switched it. I used to be Steve, and then I came up with this thing where I use Steven at work and Steve in my personal life, and that way, because I can't remember people 5 minutes after I meet them, so that way later on, if I meet someone and they call me Steven, I can at least do a binary sort on it and go, oh, okay, let's see, I got to know these guys from work. But late in my life, I've come to like Steven more.
There you go.
So go with Steve. We'll switch it up.
There you go. I'll do my best not to screw up too much one way or the other. But at the end of the day, the main point there is that Stephen and I have a somewhat long and sordid relationship, as we were both in the front office baseball league that he calls FOBL and I call or FOBL and I call FOBL. And so when Stephen suggested seemed like he was actually interested in the BBA, like I said, I've been looking forward to this podcast moment from the time that you said that you were interested in joining. So,
yes, me too. I mean, and like we were talking about as we were chatting beforehand, you and I have never actually spoken in person, but I feel like if I had to rank the people in my life, whether it be digital or in person or something that I feel I know very well, you and probably half of the FOBL have got to be in the top 100. I mean, it's been 19 years of interaction, although, we had a break there for a while. But, I mean, the daily chats for FOBL, the live sims, everything, I feel like I know you really, really well.
That's dangerous.
It is very dangerous.
But I think actually that probably, my guess is that will resonate with a lot of the folks here in the BBA who are the kind of the long timers, right? Because, there's hundreds of thousands of posts on this board, and I've only been in the BBA since 2024, so I'm only, I'm a newbie when it comes down to it. So these guys have been around each other and they kind of know who each other are from the flavor that their interaction is. So I think that probably resonates with a lot of people who are long-term out of the parkers in online leagues. I mean, I could say the same thing about several of the old FOBL personalities, right? I mean,
yeah.
I can almost imagine sitting down in front of CJP and just listening to him, right? I mean, that would be
you're
like
a braver man. You're a braver man than I.
I'd want to make sure I had an escape route, but I mean, that would be
a
fantastic.
A weapon in a holster or something. But I mean, it's so divergent to think about the personalities of these people, and then be like, okay, well, he's got a doctorate in philosophy and he teaches at college. He's teaching impressionable young men and women, and this guy is a degenerate in a good way. Not in a typically bad way, but I mean, and then you had EZ, who we styled as a serial killer, and this guy's got a doctorate in physics. He's basically splitting the atom somewhere out near where you live.
There you go.
It's just, I kept trying to tell people, like, in this league, we had all these guys with advanced degrees who were really passionate about very specific things, and it just came together at the perfect time where we could all leverage our interests to have a good time. And it's so hard to replicate that. But that's one of the things that kind of interested me about the BBA when you mentioned it, is that I started looking at the forum and I could sense the long time community aspect of it. Even though I'm sure people have cycled in and out as is usual, there's still just a feeling of community on the message board, which is something that FOBL lost there at the end, because we originally came from the front office football boards, and then once activity started to wane a little bit at FOBL, then people kind of migrated back. But BBA seems to be this self-contained place where people have been for many, many years, and I love it.
Yeah, I think there's a whole lot to be said for the comparison. When I compare the community within the FOBL and the community within the BBA, I liked what you were saying, a lot of really smart people from a lot of really interesting and diverse areas. I mean, the BBA has teachers and finance folks and construction workers and EMTs and, I mean, just a broad array of people doing lots of interesting things, people from across the world, writers, retired folks, I think Taylor's in college, a college kid, I mean, just this interesting collection of really smart people that share a passion for the game itself, and eventually it builds this community bond. And one of the things I love about doing these GM corners is that almost everyone eventually kind of opens up into something that's personal about themselves, and you start to get a flavor for, especially for some of the grizzled veterans who have been here much longer than me, how important this community has been to them in their actual lives, right?
Yeah.
And you get this place where people can come to and set aside the crap that's going on in their life for a little while sometimes when things get crappy, because not everyone's life is perfect all the time, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I just think that's an important thing.
It is, and like you were talking about, I mean, when I found FOBL, or when we created it, I was at the lowest point I'd ever been in my life. And if it weren't, I've said this to people in the league many times, but if it weren't for FOBL, I would not have had any happiness in my life for a long period of time. And so it's just communities like the BBA and the old FOBL and things like that are just so valuable to the participants that I tried to explain it to people in the older generation, like my parents or someone, and they don't get it, because they can only really envision it in the sense of an in-person type thing, like a bowling league or a Rotary Club or things like that. But the relationships that I formed and have with people online is just as real to me and just as satisfying. And that's really all that matters. Perception, not reality. Yeah. And you mentioned the passion for OOTP. I mean, I have such a love-hate relationship with this fucking game. I feel like if I met Marcus, I would shake his hand and then I would strangle him, because he has just driven me crazy for so many years. But at the same time, he created this stupid fucking game that has given me so much joy in my life. I can't really be mad at him. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just a random number generator. So, okay, I'm going to put, as I've gotten older and I've chilled out a little bit, I can put that aside and say, okay, it's a faulty tool, but it's actually worked quite well for what it needed to do for many, many years for me. So here's my money. I'll shut up. Just give me some online stuff eventually, but that's never going to happen.
Yeah, not very much anyway. We got the trade feature that was nice, but one feature in 20 years. Wow, that's a big deal. Yeah,
count
actually,
up
I think that's a lot,
options.
and I'm going to get into Louisville and the BBA here next, but I think that actually is an interesting segue between the FOBL and the BBA, right? Because during the time that I was in the FOBL, I absolutely adored that league for multiple reasons, right? And the community is one. The raw competition, I think it was one of the more competitive leagues because we got everything out of all the financials were done outside of the game, and at that time, the financials in the game were just absolute
Oh,
crap, right?
yeah.
Now they're kind of bearable, but sometimes you still look at them and go, ah.
Mhm.
But the other thing that I loved about the FOBL is its brand and its persona, right? Was kind of snotty teenage kid in within the construct of Out of the Park. So I think Marcus at times wanted to strangle us too.
Oh, the whole board, twisted and infantile since 2001.
Yes, indeed.
Uh, and that was quite accurate. And whenever we stormed the OOT boards or other leagues, we really, it was almost a lot of the stuff that goes on online right now, like on Twitch and other places. We kind of started that.
Oh yeah,
No one followed us. We were doing it. No one knew about it, but we started it. Damn it!
right.
So
And I
we're going
think
to take
that's
credit for all the bad shit that goes on the internet.
well, I think actually in context, right? I mean, there's the FOBL FOBL was this super elite league, and we knew it, and we pushed it, right? The BBA is identical in that sense. We
Yeah.
are an elite league. We're now a more mature set of people. I don't know what the BBA was like, in the earliest days. I only can say the 15 seasons that I've been in it. But I think that the culture has shifted also from one that was more, I'm making this up, right?
Yeah.
It feels like the culture has changed from one that was more kind of a internal circle one to where now you're getting a broader range of people into it, and the flavor of participation is and the flavor of eliteness is now about the competition and about the people and not so much about the attitude. Right, so
Yeah.
there's kind of the difference that I get there. The main point though is um, when you come into a league like the FOBL or come into a league like the BBA, and the reason I'm in the BBA is probably because of the flavor that I got in the FOBL. I wanted
Mhm.
to be in an elite league, right?
Yes.
I want to be in a league that is like this. I want to be in a group of people in with a community who is actively interested in each other, but also interested in getting better and winning and working
Yeah.
hard. And nobody cheats. As far as I know, nobody cheats. Um,
Mhm.
but I absolutely loved Aaron's. I don't know if you read it or not. Aaron wrote a introduction to his previews in the media guide last year, where he talked about what it meant to be a part of this league and what it meant to win it, and um, and Aaron being one of the grizzled vets that I look up to is I read that and I just went, yes, that's
Yeah.
it, right?
Well, I think that probably is one of the reasons that the BBA has the longevity that FOBL lacked. Is I mean, you have the competition, but the FOBL relied so much on just the attitude of being outsiders and being smarter than everyone else, because that was part of our DNA, that ultimately it drove away the kind of people we needed to recruit to keep it going and to bring in fresh blood. And as people's lives got more complicated and they started to drop away, there wasn't people to fill the gaps. But the BBA seems to have been so successful in bringing in new people because I feel that it's a more welcoming community. And whether that's just because of the DNA of the people that make it up, or if it's because we're a little older now and we can tolerate more shit, who knows? But I think it really bodes well for the future of the BBA that in an era where it seems to me that online leagues are actually shrinking in terms of popularity, and I have no data to back that up, it's just my gut feel, that we're able to expand and bring people in. And that blows my mind, because I think one of the things that's changed for me is, the FOBL is my only league for about 17 years, something like that. But now I'm in 4 or 5. which is one thing we'll talk about later when we get into the BBA. But it's just such a high level of competition in the BBA and these other leagues that I'm in. It just, when you bring new people in, it just seems to be it dilutes the competition. Mm-hmm. But what I've seen with the BBA is it's actually enhancing it. And like you said, I want to swim with sharks. I've been playing this game for a very long time. I'm pretty good at it. And I don't want to go against some guy this is his first online league, or he doesn't really take it seriously or anything like that. I want to play against guys who want to win and who want to be the best, because it's interesting then. It's not just a wasted hour in front of my laptop reassembling my minor leagues, when ultimately it doesn't matter because half the league is checked out anyway.
There you go. So how actually are you feeling about Louisville now? You've had a year under the belt, getting ready to move into an expansion year, and you're going to come into the real division, mm-hmm. The one that matters the most.
Wait, we're expanding? When did this happen? I can't keep up with all this shit. Well, first I want to say, thanks to Fat Nige. I'm assuming I'm saying that correctly. He left me some very good players. And so that helps a lot when you have a guy like Sime Kwaku. I assume that's how you say his name. It'd be nice to have phonetic spellings in OOTP, but
I know the way that I pronounce his name is Yellow Springs left fielder.
He may be at some point. In the thread that was just posted, when you said time for me to trade him, that really does fit with my strategies and my history in FOBL. Because I love, like I've said to other people, I have never played solo OOTP. Never. I tried it and it bored the shit out of me. And 5 minutes after I cut it off, because online leagues is where it's at. And I only care about trading and drafting. That's what I love. And so that's one of the frustrations with BBA is it's hard to trade when you don't have extra assets like draft picks to work with. But we can talk about that as well. But
sure. No, I think one of the things, you talk about learning more about people in your online environments than you do some of your personal relationships, right? When you came into the league, I don't know whether you said it out in public or whether it was I don't remember whether it was a Slack or whatever, but you said something like, I think I'm going to take the first year and just kind of chill and see what's going on, right? And I just chuckled and I said, that is never going to happen.
Well,
and like 3 days later, you're taking the team and you're shaking it up from the top, dropping all the veterans down. Right?
Well, what I like to say is that's part of my galaxy brain strategy. I want to lull people into a sense of security, and then just bam, drop the knife when they're not expecting it. But no, I really did. I swear to God, I came into it. Every league that I've been in for the last several years, the hardest thing to get used to is the individual valuation models in each league. And this being such a shark league and so old, I really did believe, look, I need some time to really figure out what the trade market looks like, to figure out, because I've never played in a league where you can't trade draft picks. I also needed to figure out, okay, what does the depth of the draft pool look like? What does the IFAs look like? Free agency, things like that. But I get bored very easily in my life, and I started to disassemble the team that Fat Nige had spent so many hours, I'm sure.
Well, you talk about player evaluation. What does kind of a classic Shaw player look like? What do you care about?
It has changed through the years. I think I mentioned on the boards that Cuervo Ball mandated a certain model. Cuervo was a guy in the FOBL, for everyone listening, who basically reverse engineered the game and figured out that pitcher movement was the only thing that mattered. I think it was like V5, maybe something like that, or maybe older. And so for a long time, my pitching models looked like Cuervo Ball. High movement, don't give a shit about anything else. But as the game kind of started to change its internal models, I think, to go to a more sabermetric type style, then what I'm looking for changes. And it used to be power. That's it. I just want guys that can hit for power and can field, and pitchers that had movement. But part of being in the BBA is I have to learn what works here. And the model that we're dealing with and the player pool we're dealing with kind of makes other types of players more attractive to me now. Because you've got so many guys that are at this baseline of like a 6 contact, or like a guy with a 5 eye, I never would have looked at in another league. But here, I'm going, yeah, he might be a good backup for me. I don't know. So it is definitely now my model. I don't want to give everything away now. This is a trade secret. But
that's okay. I'll edit that part out. Just tell me all the things that you really, that I need to know.
I will tell them to you and you alone. No one else is going to listen to this, right? Okay.
Exactly. Nobody ever listens to these anyway. No. So.
But now there's a player in one of my other leagues that is now one of my profile guys. It's like high contact, high gap, high avoid K, with speed and defense. It's like that guy works anywhere. he's going to get his on base from the contact and the avoid K. He's going to get his power from the gap, and he's going to run like a mother, and he's going to field. It's like if I get a few of those guys in my lineup, then I can start sprinkling in the guys like the guy whose last name I can't pronounce in my organization, Hugh Mangrove. The guy from
Human growth hormone is who he is.
That's exactly who it is. Mangrove throat warbler, whatever. I can sprinkle a guy like him in who's absolutely not going to walk ever, but he has a huge power. So that's kind of where I'm starting to land. Is I used to not care about avoid K, and now I really look at it a lot more thanks to what I've seen here and some other places. Yeah. So that's a very long-winded answer that probably communicated absolutely nothing to anyone. But
no, I think that actually plays in relation to Out of the Park and its evolution of its model too, right? As the model gets better, I'll call it better anyway, as the model gets more robust, as it gets more robust, you can start to get value out of players in more nuanced ways. So these guys that have, I had the conversation I had with Tyler last, we talked about looking for players, and I think Tyler and I look at things in a fairly similar fashion at the end of the day. I like players that don't have holes, or if they have one hole, then that turns into a player who probably is undervalued. And by holes, I include the ability to run and play defense, and because defenses in these days, this past 4 or 5 versions of Out of the Park defense has become a much stronger. Right.
Yeah.
I remember back in the FOBL days, I did that humongous defensive study. Right.
I do. Yes.
I mean, I posted like 200 posts in a thread or something. I'm making that number up, but I'm probably not too far off, right? Because I was basically so fed up with the defensive model that I wanted to show, to be blunt about it, I wanted to show Marcus that all of the data that he's got right now, he can use in this way, right? And I can prove to you what your defensive guys are doing and not doing, and you need to get this better. Lo and behold, one version later is when zone rating came into play, right? So I don't know whether, I could never ever say that Marcus looked at my model and said, oh, I can do this, right? But I think that once he put zone rating into the game is when the model started getting actually better.
Yeah, I started to enjoy OOTP a lot more once defense actually became something that just wasn't a cosmetic rating, that you could just throw a second baseman in and catcher.
Yeah, especially at the catcher position. I mean, I got so upset at Bruno in his Wisconsin snowbird catchers that were horrific, right?
And still threw out 40%. No pass balls, no problems.
And Jerry's a guy I have a personal relationship with. I know I worked with him for years, so.
Oh my God.
So I could just see him sitting behind his computer screen with that cheesy Jerry Brunelli grin on his face as he threw whatever the guy's name was into catcher, specifically saying, I'm going to do this so Ron will get pissed.
Oh my God, I missed that.
So anyway, yeah, that I was interested to hear how you were looking at the way you evolve players and thought about players because never
Yeah.
really had a chance to dig into that. So
Yeah, and I think your original question, which I never answered, and probably am not going to answer half the questions you asked me because that's just who I am.
because
But
you're a lawyer,
well, let's don't talk about that. I'm barely a lawyer. Yeah, barely, just hanging on by my fingernails. You asked me how do I feel about the Loserville Sluggers, um, and it's a real challenge. And this kind of went into why I traded when I did. Was when I took a look at them, there was some high level talent there, right? Hubbard and Kwaku and guys like that. And the guy I traded to you for pennies on the dollar ultimately, which was one of my worst trades in the history of my career. But alas, it's you and you're a shark. So what are you going to do? But there's so
I
much.
think
There
you
was
may
so
be
much.
overselling that, but that's okay.
I have never oversold anything ever, and I'm offended that you would say that. But there was a lot of this high level talent, but there's none of this middle ground of talent. My players were either really good or really bad, and that made it very difficult for me to try to make deals in a league where you can't trade draft picks. And it's something I'm still struggling with, as the people who have tried to negotiate with me will probably be nodding their head in violent agreement. It's just really tough for me to find these middling pieces to stick in a trade to make the value prop work. If I've only got stars and scrubs, I can't really trade anyone unless I can only trade stars. And that, coming into a league where you don't understand the value prop, is a really scary position to be in. But I did that article, and I started to really look at the team and break it down and say, okay, look at these guys. Their ratings look great, but their performance is not as consistent as it should be. I think this is a guy who, based on his age and his contract, yeah, he's a top player, but I think I can let this guy go. I just knew that I couldn't let Kwaku go. I couldn't let Hubbard go. And that was pretty much it. Everyone else was expendable at that point. So then I felt comfortable trying to make over the team so I could at least get some depth back of these middling type players, the 40 FV to the 50 FV, that I could use to get some other pieces into my organization. So I think I answered your question. So I feel pretty good about it now. I think it's been restocked a little bit. And of course, thanks to Nige, I have a couple of stars that I can work with, but I feel pretty good about where we are right now.
There you go. You'll probably still draft at a fairly reasonable position for another season or two.
Yeah, we need that. It's still a little thin, but it's starting. The last draft was eye-opening for me. Because I think it was my first draft. And getting to see what kind of value is available in the second round and third round, it's like, there's not a lot going on here. All these guys kind of look the same. But I need that. I need another year to kind of stock the system of these 40 to 50 FV guys that I can trade to someone who sees something in them that I either don't think is important or I miss. Kind of like with the guy I traded to you.
There you go. Well, we will certainly continue to admire Abdul Sadeki, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I have no idea, but he's got a lot of L's and J's and D's in there.
I like Siddiqui. That
Siddiqui.
sounds very that sounds very foreign and exotic to me. So I'm going with Siddiqui.
I like that. What I like most is that he bumped his range after I got him. So
he sounds like a fun villain, actually. But yeah, he bumped his range. His contact looks a lot better. I mean, he's dropped off in the last few months, like you said. But still, when you've got a guy with that kind of range, who's is going to be around a certain level of performance, I mean, that's a huge piece for you.
Yeah,
and that's a typical Ron trade. Sharks, I'm chumming the waters with all these good prospects, and here comes Ron. Hey, I got a second baseman that I have absolutely no fucking need for ever, but he's so good, you're going to love him. You got to try this guy out. Why don't you give me that useless center fielder? I mean, you've already got your other outfield studs. He's not even going to get playing time.
That's not exactly how I remember the conversation going, but
I have a transcript. I think you private messaged me. I'm reading from the private message you sent me. pretty much what it's, or that may be just what it sounded like in my head. Sometimes it's hard to tell.
Yeah, I'm thinking that it may be a mix of the two before it's all said and done.
Might be a little seller's remorse, might be a little self-hating action going on here. There's a lot going on in my brain, and not all of it is positive.
There you go. You have a brain?
Ron, are we going to get into this?
Oh, I guess not. Let me go back to the basic rule of thumb on these silly GM corners, and I'll pretend like I'm putting you under the hot bright lights of the lightning round, where I will definitely put forward all of the questions that I need in order to understand how you play the game.
Okay, I am ready. I feel like I'm on the $25,000 pyramid with soupy sales back in 1983 when I was watching at home. So let's hit it.
You are definitely speaking my tune. And
yes,
Soupy
you and I
Sales,
are older gentlemen.
I don't know if I've heard the name Soupy Sales for some time, but you have made my entire day.
Oh, it makes me feel so good.
I should also mention that I spent like an hour and a half 3 days ago watching an old Smothers Brothers documentary. So, and digging that. So it's like Lenny Bruce without all the cursing.
Yeah, well, you're just old. So, that's way before my time. Not that I actually ran into one of the Smothers Brothers physically when I was in Vegas as a child with my parents or anything like that. But
very cool.
Yes, back in the day when you could bring a child to Vegas, and I think I was 6, but you couldn't be within 3 feet of the casino machines or they would get mad. And then instead of like getting me a babysitter, they just locked me in the hotel room while they went down and gambled and watched shows.
Whereupon you ran into one of the Smothers Brothers.
Exactly. Yeah, I was bored. I couldn't make a trade.
Well, Out of the Park wasn't around at that point, so why would you even...
Marcus wasn't even around at that point. Oh, good Lord.
Alrighty. Coaches. Do you look for anything in particular when it comes to coaches?
I hate coaches. I hate them. I hate everything about them. The interface for finding them is the worst fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. It's right up there with nuclear waste and various types of war crimes. So I really don't even like to think about them. But to answer your question, now that I've actually been in some leagues where they're utilized, I think the only thing I care about is how good are they with working with youngsters. I think that's probably the only thing that moves any kind of needle in the internal OOTP engine. So that's all I really care about. And the one thing I have looked for lately, when I first started messing around with coaches in another league, I started to try and get into, I want guys who specialize in power pitchers or ground ballers. And I just said, F that. That is way too much work. I just want the neutral guy who's good with youngsters, stick him in there, sign him for 100 million years, and let's rock.
Rule of thumb on pitchers. How much do you weight individual pitches versus the big three stuff movement control?
I've gone back and forth on this. I used to weight them very heavily. Now I really don't care because I think their effect is pretty much modeled in the big three numbers anyway. So the only thing I care about, obviously, and this is no secret to anyone who's played OOTP for more than 5 minutes, is the stuck changeup. Stuck changeup equals relief pitcher. Non-stuck changeup equals starting pitcher. And then you're like, okay, if he has a slider, he's going to have splits and things like that. So that's really all I care about in terms of the individual pitch ratings anymore.
There you go. Yeah, actually, on an aside, taking an aside there real quick, the stuck changeup is actually an extremely interesting dynamic when it comes to pitches and the development thereof. I did a very complicated. You might be surprised that I do occasionally some fairly complicated studies.
I heard someone does those, but I don't know who.
I did a fairly complicated study where I looked at the development cycle of every pitch type, and I posted this big long thing up in the development boards, right, for Matt and Marcus to look at, and I think their fundamental response was, "Thank you very much. We'll try to figure out what this means." But definitely, the changeup definitely develops in a way that no other pitch develops. It's the stuck changeup is a 100% real thing. and it is a problem
It
for
is.
those who actually care about certain things. Anyway,
Yeah. And the only other thing I care about, I love fucking knuckleballers. I will, anyone listening to this, if you have a knuckleballer, trade him to me. I will pay a premium because it entertains me to have a left-handed knuckleball starting pitcher with 4 stuff and 10 control, strike out a million people. It just makes me laugh thinking about Joel Peralta from the Virginia Woodchucks
there you go.
from back in the day. Yes.
There you go. Oh boy, now
Yeah, but
from super
that's a deep
sales to
cut
Joe
right there,
Peralta.
buddy.
I don't know if I could get a better day than this.
I can't. I mean, it's so. When you think about this, I mean, the fact that some of those fake players in the FOBL are more real to me than some people I've actually dated in my life. Hype. Tony Amon is a real person to me. God damn it.
Oh yes,
He always will be. Don't tell me any different.
I can still rattle off a lot of my Los Alamos
Uh,
Nukes players.
yes, and I hope
you know,
that's what happens here in the BBA for me.
yep.
I hope I get to that point.
I can tell you that I can do the same with a lot of my early 9 players. So
Mhm.
so it's like anything else, right? If you put your weight into it, it will repay itself in entertainment value for a long
Absolutely.
time. So first thing you do when taking on a sim.
Pray that it doesn't crash, and look at my CPU usage and wonder why the fuck OOTP is taking up half my cores. Um, but the first thing I do is look and see any dev reports for my top prospects. Like I said, I don't care about winning and losing. I only care about drafting, trading, and player development. But that's only half true. I want to see where I'm doing. I want to see who's hot, who's cold, who's injured. But ultimately, I mean, the enjoyment I derive out of OOTP is messing with the minor leagues and watching players develop and become better. That's what I love.
There you go. That's a big part of it for me. I think you and Ted would have, if Ted ever comes back, I think you and Ted will have a lot to share on that too. Strategy
Yeah.
settings. What do you do with them?
Ignore them. I have. This is a poor admission on my part, but I have never really messed with them. I just don't see, other than a couple. Like, I'm not going to set intentional walks at a crazy amount, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do individual strategy settings on people that need to hit so that they never bunt. And but it's too tedious for me. It's more front office football type garbage for me with those settings. When you start getting into, some people, I would imagine you dive into the strategy settings and you're like, okay, goddammit, in the 6th inning with 1 out and a person on first base who has a sprained ankle and a left-handed hitter up who's a switch hitter, but he's got a little bit of a split and a knuckleballer on the mound, I want you to bunt 12.5% of the time. You would love that shit. It drives me crazy. So I ignore strategy settings except for the most basic thing.
Now, mostly what I do with strategy settings is bitch about the interface, but
Yes, well, that as well. Do you feel that I just slandered you?
no, not at all.
Okay, good.
Because I like the strategy settings. I just don't know if they really make that big of a difference one way or the other. I'm sure they do. I shouldn't put it that way. I know they do make a difference. The question
Yeah.
ultimately is from a entertainment value standpoint and time involved. I don't know that
Yeah.
they pay back in that sense. And what
Yeah.
really pisses me off the most is uh, they seem to change.
What, just of their own accord, like a ghost in the machine type thing?
They seem to, or maybe it's just the way they've changed the interface. If you click like all times, if you accidentally click all times,
Oh,
then it resets
oh,
everything again, right? And that just
Marcus, it's a goddamn undo button.
yeah.
Everyone's had an undo button for a couple of decades now. Figure it out.
All right, last question on the infamous lightning round. What is your absolute favorite out of the park memory ever?
Oh my God. And this is the slowest lightning round, I think, ever in the history of lightning rounds.
Well,
But
then you have not been listening to my podcast.
I'm trying to keep my answers short. I swear to
No,
God.
no, no. Everyone does the
same. Favorite moment? Well, okay. It has to be winning my first FOBL championship in 2007 of the FOBL 2007 against Sims with Tony Hype Iman, the star rookie, coming through for me huge in the final I can't pronounce his fucking company. In the final series. That's my favorite. That's the most joy I've ever derived from this game in the history of my life. But also, a secondary most enjoyable moment was when I didn't trade Tony Amon a year prior to Vu because he disappeared off the face of the earth and we thought he had been kidnapped by a serial killer and dismembered. And then we called and talked to his mother and made sure that he was alive and he was okay. But thanks to his disappearance, I did not trade my most favorite player of all time, and that led to the championship. So 1A and 1B.
There you go. Well, I think that actually is a good comprehensive ending to the whole kind of conversation there, because the whole conversation of leagues, because the whole idea that a social platform like a out of the park league could lead somebody to actually care enough to call someone else and make sure they're okay in person. I think that says an awful lot about a community, right?
With Vu and with Duke.
Yep.
Yes, tracked his ass down through various websites and called his mother and made sure that he was alive and well. Yes. Very spooky, stalkery type behavior in retrospect, but in the moment it felt very important.
Well, it's stalky if, there's a difference between concern and stalking.
Well, it's a fine line, Ron, and I think we may have crossed it a couple of times, but I'm going to stand by it.
There you go. One of the things that I wanted to have you talk about a little bit is, obviously I think anyone listening gets a strong flavor for how deep you are into out of the park and your history with the game and online leagues. And the idea of having you talk a little bit about what it's like to come into the BBA, I'd like to have you maybe give some ideas for what you would suggest other people do. How did you start? How do you absorb a complex league like this if you were a new person? What would be your suggestions?
Go slowly. I swear, I think I read the Constitution and everything else multiple times before I even told you, yeah, I think I'm in this thing. And even then, I had to keep looking at it. The thing that was really challenging for me at the start was there's so much information about this league, stuff that's important, like the participation points and the stadium stuff and all the stuff you can do with the participation points and all that, but it's all in kind of disparate areas of the forum. And some of it's almost deprecated because I think I posted in a few of these threads, like, what the fuck is a Rule 7? This kind of stuff. It's like, there's no links. I did a search. There's nothing here. And it's like, oh yeah, we don't do that yet, or whatever it was. And so I think the spread out nature of the information on the forums is something that's really challenging to a new owner. I think I wanted to bring a guy in from one of my other leagues, and I really hesitated because I don't know how sophisticated he is with online leagues in general, and I think something like this, it's good and bad, right? You want to bring in people who are super experienced in online leagues and can handle this deluge of information, but at the same time, it runs away or scares away some of the newer people who could ultimately develop into people like you, or Fat Nige, or some of the famous guys. So just the sheer volume of information and it not being in a centralized location where people can easily go and say, okay, can I take participation points and do this? Like, how can I find that very easily? So, kind of like what I did with, or what I hope to do with that post I made of all the studies and everything, I'd like to kind of have an index and all this kind of stuff with it So maybe something like that, a post for new owners where, and maybe this exists, and this is part of my issue, where it says, okay, here are the main things about the league, and here are links to everything you need to read about them, instead of having to kind of do what I did, which is go to various forums and pick and choose everything. So if that exists, I apologize. I didn't find it. I think back in the day when I was younger and I gave a shit more, I think the more complexity that a league has, the more it was attractive to me, because I'm able to generally, part of my career is to consume large quantities of information and adult beverages and do something with it. And but lately I've gotten a little less tolerance for both. So this massive amount of information, it was more of kind of a slog for me this time. But I think I got it. I think I'm coming into it. The other thing, let's see, let me take a breath. The other thing is, like we said before, not being able to trade draft picks. It absolutely destroys me. Just because, number one, that's my joy in life, is to trade draft picks and to acquire draft picks. In one of my other leagues, I had 6 first rounders this last draft, and I think I had 20% of the top 40 picks. So that made me very, very happy. Not being able to do that in the BBA makes me very, very sad. Because then maybe someone would get Sime Kawaku if I could get some draft picks for him, but alas, it's not going to happen. But yeah, not being able to trade draft picks has made everything for me, the value prop, a lot harder to digest, and it's been a lot tougher to negotiate with people, and I feel that I frustrated some people. So I'm going to apologize to you anonymously. I won't say any names, but I feel that some people are very unhappy with me and the pace of my negotiation, so I do apologize. But it's just been really hard for me to get my head around, okay, I want player X from this team. I have player Y. Player Y is definitely not as good as player X, so I need to fill in the gap. But it's almost insulting to just kind of throw shit into the gap. I'm not building a manure wall here. I actually need to throw something into the trade that has some value to somebody. And for me, it's easy to go, oh yeah, second rounder last year, that was picked about 41st. He had these ratings. That looks about right. Here, take my second rounder. That's very easy for me to comprehend and to conceptualize. So that's probably my biggest frustration with the league.
There you go. Yeah, I think that's actually interesting too, because kind of my take on it, having played in leagues where you trade draft picks, and in this league, obviously we don't. I don't think the people traded draft picks. I guess we did. We did actually. The other thing that I feel is happening within the league that you can't feel right now, with only 1 year in the league, is there are some things going on, some dynamics going on in the economy of the league that Ted and I used to discuss, argue about, conversate over, whatever you want to say. The financial model over the past about 3 to 4 years, seasons, so between the version 19 and 20, the players are asking for a lot more money in their requests for extension, and arbitration numbers are going up some, and in the early stages of free agency, they're asking for 20 and 25 and $30 million, right? And from my perspective, that's actually a good thing within the context of the world, because at the end of the day, these big stars are often getting that money. So by definition, it's kind of like the real life world. If they get the money, they were worth it, right?
Yeah.
But then the question at the end of the day, of course, when I gave Lucas McNeil a $25 million, $30 million contract, he's clearly not worth that kind of money in the BBA performance environment. There's no way that, if you're going to say you need to get 3 or 4 million, a war for $3 or $4 million, there's no way he's going to put 7, 8, 9 war up every year. That's just not going to happen, right? So by definition, he's overpaid, and so he's. The bottom line is the salary cap combined with the players actually asking for either more than they're worth or what they're worth, depending on how you view it, is really only been in place for, say, 3, 4, 5 total seasons. And I think that the league is just now starting to get a flavor for what that does to the market dynamic, right? A
Right.
young player on Minsal
Oh, I dream of those.
has a
Yes.
much greater value in that environment than he does in an environment where you can get a superstar for $14 million, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah. And coming from FOBL, I mean, because our men's out guys were just so valuable, given the free agent auction we did, and other people. I don't know if they. I mean, we, like you said, we ran finances outside the league, and for everyone who's listening, we did free agency in an eBay style auction where there was no arbitration, there were no contract extensions. When people had 5 years at 100K each, and after that they went to free agency, period, and everyone got to bid on them in an eBay auction. That was amazing. And I would love to see something like that in the DBA, but alas, it's not going to happen. But it really did prepare me for, look, I've always believed that Minsal players have an outsized amount of value in the league. And so I'm kind of used to that. But at the same time, I think working with in-game finances over the past few years, it is such a delicate balancing act because it can get out of whack so fast. In a league that I was commissioning, I sat there and played with those settings for hours trying to get a workable financial model for the league. And then, of course, all it takes is some asshole like this owner in Louisville to give Alfredo Martinez, a $56 million guaranteed, and the whole thing gets blown to hell. So, whoever that asshole is definitely needs to have a talking to, because what the fuck is going on there? But
I'm feeling internal team politics coming through the podcast.
yeah, we're having some chats, Andrew Luck type chats with Alfredo.
There you go.
But seriously, all it takes is a couple of guys like me to come in and say, all right, well, I have a strategy where I'm going to do X because I have a large amount of money sitting here and I can't do anything with it, and that hurts everyone else because then the floor bumps up. I think it does. Just anecdotally.
Yeah, I don't think it actually works that way, but
it doesn't? Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, then ignore it. I just said.
Yeah, or it doesn't work that way as strongly as people suggest. At the end of the day, what I was really getting to in that sense is that the economic model that all of us folks that have been in the BBA 5 and 6 and 8 years ago are more familiar with, right, is changing under our feet. So not only is your player evaluation, you're trying to calibrate a player evaluation that we have as a new person coming in. You're trying to calibrate player evaluation and how the league looks at players in a situation where that is actually changing also, right? So I'm wondering how things are. This trade deadline was really interesting. I'm wondering how things are going to work out, because in real life baseball right now, what you find is players are kind of at their peak value when they're in their second year of arbitration.
Yep.
Right? The star players, you don't see them being traded as first 3-year players, but once they get into that first and second year of arbitration, it's kind of like teams are going, okay, these guys are going to leave me and I'm going to get nothing.
Yeah.
So I need to trade them now. Right? Well, you almost started seeing some of that going on with this trade deadline. And I personally don't remember ever really seeing that being a thought pattern that goes on, especially with the have-nots, right? If you're a have-not and you've got a star player in the second year of arbitration, that player still has great value for another 2 years. But once they've actually been signed as a free agent and they're being paid in quotes market value, then the only value they have is their production, right? There's no economic value to having that player on your team. And that's Ted and I were having a conversation. I kind of shit on one of his posts at one point.
You've never done that.
Well, I didn't really mean it to be that way, but it ended up coming out that way. Most of my problems don't start with me meaning to be some way, and then whatever happens. But I think that's actually, you're talking about valuation of draft picks, and we do occasionally chat about whether we want to be a league that trades draft picks or not, and it's a decision fraught with lots of different conversation before it's all said and done.
Yeah, and I get it. I get why people want guardrails up, because the last thing you want is some asshole coming in and dropping 3 first-rounders and then disappearing. But that can be regulated.
Yeah.
I mean, the NBA did it. I think the BBA can do it. So having at least one round of draft picks to trade, like rounds 1 through 5 in the upcoming draft or something like that, I think it also helps some of these financial issues, because then you can start, they're like, okay, I have a star player. If I sign him, I'm going to go over the cap, or if I sign him, I'm going to screw up my finances. Well, let me just sell one of these second rounders for 10 million cash or something like that. It just introduces a whole nother level of gamesmanship, where certain people value draft picks highly and they can command a premium in cash for them. And people like me who don't give 2 craps about cash, I'll buy draft picks all day long because I know that I can always find cash if I need it, kind of like in my real life. I've got it stashed everywhere. Or I can always, players can always be dealt. Even if I wanted to get rid of Alfredo Martinez, I could make it happen. But I don't have to, because the Alfredo Martinez gambit is going to reach a very satisfying conclusion when he opts out this year. 100%. He's told me he's definitely leaving. So get ready, free agency. He's coming your way.
There you go. There you go. Do you have anything you would like to ask me or to talk about, ask me to pontificate on that I haven't already pontificated on?
Oh my God. Well, I keep telling you what studies I want. Why don't you jump the fuck on that, man? It's not like you have a job. Just, chop, man. I want some studies quickly so I can add to my post. But let's see. Oh, you're surprising me with this question. I would have thought of something to ask you that was simultaneously harrowing and personal and probably a little bit obscene. But now I don't have the preparation, so I can't think of it.
Well, life is so tough. You had your chance. And it's
I'm fast on my feet. I'm not the litigator I used to be, but I can still think a little bit on my feet. All right, so tell me, and I think I already know this because I've played OOTP with you for the better part of 2 decades. Tell me Ron's ideal player.
Oh,
hang on, I gotta take notes.
Like I say, my personal favorite player is the guy that nobody else wants, but does for some, it's like the Rob. I talk about Rob Thomas all the time. Rob Thomas is one of my favorite personal players, right? Mm-hmm. 2.5, 3 WAR player. Every time that I talk about trying to trade him, nobody wants him. And he's one of those guys that has a hole or two, right? He can't hit right-handed or left-handed pitching, so he's got to be platooned. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't walk very much, but otherwise, has gap power, has homer power, he's one of the
plays third base. Plays third base in a wheelchair. But other than that,
yeah, that's his biggest flaw is he can't really play defense particularly well, right? But other than that, as long as you can platoon him, he's huge value. And now I'll probably end up moving him off of third base because Dong Po Thum is going to have to play third. Because I'll have the super slick shortstop, and who's got to play shortstop. So at the end of the day, but I love those guys. I love the guys who I've got a phrase that I've used for a couple of these others that I think you win championships with your second tier players, because almost anyone who's competing has 1 to 3 or 4 kind of superstars that they're obviously fun to have. You love to have the Lee McKittricks, right? You love to have those guys, right?
Everyone's like, who? What?
Yes, but that's the beauty of this. You know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about, my friend.
In BBA terms, in Yellow Springs, I took a totally crappy team over, but I had the advantage of having a couple of really solid young guys in the organization that were staffed there by somebody who did a hardcore tank, right?
Sound music to my ears.
There you go. So, So I love those big time players, but at the end of the day, the people that I really remember the most are, the Lewis Hubbles of the world. My earliest FOBL memory is of, I remember being at the gym and working out and asking myself, spending 30 minutes asking myself whether I should use George Alvarez at second base as I moved my team from Essex to Los Alamos, right?
Oh my God.
Because he's a guy who had some skills, but nobody else would have used him. And he was horrible in a couple of places, but he had a few skills. So I actually ended up using him for like a year and a half or 2 years. I have another guy here in the BBA that's like that when Juan Arevalo is my first 2 years, and I even wrote up a post or two on this. My shortstop position was dog meat, right? And I needed some guy, and I was looking for free agents, and I was looking for a trade, and nobody would trade me anybody who was any good because I didn't have anybody to trade him except for my superstar young kids that everybody wanted, of course. And so I dig down into AA and find Juan Arevalo, who's a left-handed hitting second baseman who can hit right-handed pitching, right? And that's all he can do. And he's okay at second base.
Yeah.
And so I plug him in, and he does fantastic for like 2 years or 3 years as a filler, as a placeholder until my real guys come up, right?
Yeah.
And so I look at it, and at that stage, my finances were in total disarray, but here's this 500K player that can play for 2.5 years and win me games and make me money to where my finances get stable so that when who's the Angel De Castillo, my actual superstar second baseman who came in and eventually gave me the cold shoulder and went to San Antonio for $23 million, right? He was my long range plan, but what I remember is Juan Arevalo is the filler.
I'm looking at him right now. He gave you 2.9, 2.1, 3.5, and a shortened season of 1.7.
Yeah, because I traded him for the relief pitcher that I just called up. Right,
it's pretty good performance.
Yeah.
And I'm in the same boat. Like I look at my team and I just have this mass of guys, these 4A type guys who all look the same. When you look at their ratings, they all look good enough where I don't want to DFA them because this guy's got a 7 contact. Certainly someone's going to grab him if I wave him. But then I stick him in the lineup and he sucks. And so I'm just going, okay, is it small sample size? Is he really more like a 6 in contact? And it's so frustrating to have so many guys that are just so interchangeable that you can't figure out, okay, where am I going to get the value until my studs come up? Because, I was doing very well early in the year because some of these guys were on a hot streak when really the only decent people I had on my team were Kwaku and Hubbard and the pitcher and maybe one other guy, definitely not including the shitheel you traded me. But those are the only decent guys I had, and all these shitty guys, these 4A guys, were playing above their heads, and then once their performance crashed, you saw what happened. So I don't know what to do about that mass of crap that's sitting between my AAA team and my Major League team. And I think expansion is going to solve some of that for me. Because they're going to be getting plane tickets to various new places. And I'm going to be forced to deal with it and to get into free agency and really try and grab some guys that fit my model.
There you go. Yeah, and I think that a lot of my reaction to that question about trying to figure out the commonalities, you get all these guys that kind of look the same. They don't really, but they kind of do. And you don't know what to make of them. That's where stats come into play.
Yeah, and that's where that's the main, okay, for so long we played, and these minor league stats and these college stats and all that, they meant absolutely nothing. And now they mean something, but what exactly? They don't mean as what they should mean, but they mean more than nothing. And trying to find where it is in that continuum is a source of endless frustration for me personally.
Yeah, well, I think that's, in my frame of reference, they have always meant something.
Well, I'm simplistic. I don't have your sophistication.
I don't know if sophistication is the right term, but they've always meant something, right? Because what you're really, when you look at a guy who's got a 7 contact, and you say, okay, he's not hitting, well, a 7 contact actually means some things underneath the game, and in particular, in most online leagues, when you get down into it, you look at contact and avoid K, and I tend to look at avoid K as a indicator of how accurate contact is. Just
thanks to you, I've started to do that.
I mean, it's not completely true, but it is fair enough, right? If you've got a really high contact or a really high avoid K, then likely that 7 contact is real. If you've got a low avoid K, that 7 contact may or may not be completely real. It's hard to call.
Unless you're Hugo Mangrove Throat Warbler, Ganache, with his 12 power.
There you go. So when you get down into it, this question of stats is there completely in my mind to tell me where the real ratings are. Right.
Yeah.
And it's always been that way. I can remember writing posts in the FOBL about, who was I was using a second baseman, Paul Hart.
With the E on the end, I think. I don't know.
I don't remember for sure, but he was a young second baseman who had middling ratings, right? And high speed, and he was at the time going to be my replacement for was it McKittrick was playing second base at that time. But anyway, I remember making this post because somebody was asking me about how I decide to move a guy up. So I made a post looking at his contact ratings and his different ratings and comparing them to I think he was in AA at the time, if I'm remembering that right, but I was comparing his stats to the average AA player, to the average AA pitcher, and and trying to decide, because when you've got a rating bar, we use 20 to 80, right? A 55 is not a 55 is not a 55. They're all different. And the reason they're different is because the rating zones from 1 to 250 are split into each one of those blocks, and so a 6 avoid K is something between 101 and 120, right? So if you're 101 or a 120, you both look like a 6.
Yep.
But those are very different performance profiles. So you need stats to figure out whether you're at the 120 or the 101 range.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
and then you're like, well, how long do I let this guy struggle in the majors until I just say, okay, well, he's probably not what I thought he was,
right,
or it's just small sample size.
Right.
And by the time you figure that out, the year is gone and you're screwed. But yeah, that post was one of the most valuable things that I give to new players. Because I send them that post. I'm like, one of the things you need to understand is a 6 is not always a 6. And once you're a new player and you understand that changes everything for you. Because too many people come in and they're like, oh, I don't like playing without scouting because it's too easy. Like, slow down, champ. Come and join the BBA and let's see how you do. Because they just don't get it.
Yeah.
And then when you add, I'm so glad we don't use scouting because I'm in two scouting leagues. And as I have complained to you incessantly on Slack, and I'm surprised you haven't blocked me by now, this scouting is the biggest pile of garbage I've dealt with in OOTP in many, many years. It is so fucking frustrating. And so that makes the frustration of, the 6, is it a high 5 or is it a low 7? Look, so much more attractive in comparison.
Yeah, and you can go the opposite way too, right? And I think that in both the FOBL and the BBA, I think that there has been there was and there has been a deeper understanding of evaluation of players who have, 5 contact. When I first came into the BBA, a 5 contact, people would immediately shut it down, right?
Yeah.
And a 4 contact is just not even on the board. I mean, not right.
Just set them on fire.
Right,
yeah.
But a high 5 contact is actually workable if he
Especially
doesn't have holes, especially if he has a decent eye, a very good eye, and if he can do, like one of my favorite players was Carlos Garcia, who was a 5 contact, like 9 gap, 9 eye.
Oh, you're talking my language.
Right? I mean, that's a beautiful player right there because nobody will value him because of that 5 contact, and his power was fair. I can't remember whether it's a 5 or a 6, but I mean, people would look at him and go, well, he's not going to play.
He'll play. He'll play very well.
And in fact, I had him lead off against left-handed pitching for 2 or 3 years, and he was fantastic. He was, 380 on base percentage, and he ran and he played fair center field. And
that gets back to your team building strategy. I mean, you can't rely on guys like that to carry your team, but as long as they're the supporting actors in the play, you can have a very successful over.
Yeah. Now, that having been said, I don't have any Landises. That's what be brought up to me wherever I start talking about these things. I don't have any Landises, so Tyler has all of my rings.
Well, that is so. That's different play styles. It's like you've been able to succeed because you find these diamonds in the rough, or you find players who have this one ability and you maximize their ability in your scheme. And I tend to just rely on my ability to trade for really good players that everyone looks at and is like, yeah, this guy's really good. There's not a lot of nuance in the kind of players that I try and trade for, but I just have in leagues where I could trade draft picks and things like that. It's just an incessant stream of what if I got this from you? What if I got this from this other guy? And then I can turn that into this, and then ultimately in 2 years I can have a top 5 draft pick, and hopefully the guy doesn't die, after the draft.
But you can be a high volume trader in the BBA too, but I think it does.
It's just you got to have the raw materials.
Randy is a high volume trader, although he hasn't been for the past couple of years. Mostly, I think, because he's got his team.
Yeah, that's
pretty
true.
Stable,
Once you get what you want, yeah. But I hope to be a high volume trader. But at the same time, it's not just the non-draft pick trading stuff, but it's also I'm an old guy. I don't have a lot of time. And it just doesn't interest me as much when we're talking about, I got to agonize over throwing this 45 future value into player into the deal. And, okay, screw it. And I just close my laptop. I don't want to deal with it. But if it's a second rounder, a year from now, okay, sure, let's do it. Sounds good to me. That's just me, and I understand this league has a certain way they want to do things, and I will go along with it. But that is the drum I'm going to beat. Maybe silently in my apartment, and no, that's not a euphemism. But yes, I believe it strongly that we need to trade draft picks. But,
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think that pretty well sums it all up.
Dude, does it? Beating a drum in my apartment as a euphemism? That's a pretty bold way of wrapping it up. But it's got to end sometime, my friend.
There you go.
All 1.5 listeners that we have left. Thank you.
I think you're overestimating the amount of listeners we have, but we'll ask the sponsors to kick in more bucks if that's true.
I'm overestimating my interest, people's interest levels in me and Tony Amon from FOBL.
There you go.
We'll see.
No, I will always remember your post on Hype with the Brad Pitt Fight Club.
Oh, those were golden days.
Those were the days.
I actually had creativity. It hadn't been beaten out of me through long hours at a job that ultimately meant nothing. All right, my friend.
Alrighty.
It was a pleasure to speak with you for real.
Yeah, and, definitely. We'll have to do this again. We'll have to.
I'm sure that people are clamoring for more of my dulcet tones and mildly southern accent now. They can't get enough of it. I hear the demand rising as we speak.
I think so, and I think they'd really want to hear a complete year-by-year, blow-by-blow memory of the FOBL. And
I have the league file. I can definitely go in there.
Yes. My. That's dangerous.
And that's the proof. What I want to end on is, you talked about cheating earlier. I'm in a league where the commissioner actually altered player ratings, but not the player ratings you would think. He went in and changed all his fucking players to have maximum work ethic and intelligence. And he thought no one would figure it out. It just blows my mind that people would do that when, like, the Sims was the commissioner of the FOBL for 16 years. He had total access to the file. He could have done anything he wanted, and he never won a fucking championship. That man is a goddamn saint. I want him put in charge of the U.S. Treasury.
There you go.
Because he's the most honest man alive. And the same thing with people that run this league and run other leagues, where you can tell the commissioners, you know who's on who is legitimate and who isn't. And that's another thing I love about this league, is how well it's run.
And that goes like 100% to Matt, and it goes to most of the guys that have been here for forever and ever. So.
Yep. Now slap that explicit warning on this thing and let's put it out.
There you go. Well, thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Ryan.
The Brewster Baseball Association is an out-of-the-park baseball league commissioned by Mr. America himself, Matt Rechtenwald, and competed in by an amazing group of outstanding general managers. Check us out at montybrewster.net. You have been listening to the GMs Corner, a podcast where we put BBA GMs on the hot seat. Music is Cool Piano by Tigerius and is used under Creative Commons Attribution License. See you next time. Until then, have fun, be safe, and always remember that even a boring team news is worth 2 points.